I mean, I have friends who are therapists who like talk to me about should they like leave their therapist. And I think there's that level of like, I don't actually know what we're doing anymore.
Hey everybody, I'm Marielle Segarra, the host of NPR's Life Kit. And that's Mariah Seeger DeGeer, a licensed marriage and family therapist and the in-house relationship expert for Paired, an app for couples. Today, we're talking about how to break up with your therapist. Mariah says therapy shouldn't be consistently confusing. It should feel more like a coffee date with a friend, where you get into some deep conversation.
Your best therapy sessions are going to just like feel like they flow beautifully, and like maybe you'll cry every time or not. But I think there's like an honoring the fact that like you should feel like so like in alignment with your therapist in like some of those great sessions.
If it's never like that, it might be time to end things. Though to be fair, if it is like that, it might also be time to end things. Because maybe you've seen so much progress that you're ready to take a break. On this episode of Life Kit, we're going to talk about how you'll know when it's time and how to gracefully wrap things up with your therapist. And Mariah and I are also going to walk through some role play scenarios, which we hope will give you the language for these tricky, often vulnerable conversations. What do you think is the biggest misconception about the therapist-client relationship?
So I think the biggest misconception is that people often think they don't have autonomy and a level of control in that relationship, and that it's a relationship. Your relationship with your therapist is one of the most important relationships that you'll probably ever have in your life if it's done well. For some people, it's one of the longest relationships. Like your therapist sees you through so many other relationships, and it's incredibly intimate. You know, most of us tell our therapist something that like we don't tell anyone else. So really having like some level of like you have control in this situation is really important to sort of like switch up that idea.
What are some reasons that a person might want to find a new therapist or stop seeing their current therapist?
So I think the good reasons is like, good job, you, right? Like, I hope you feel super proud of yourself. Like, we're stopping therapy. And like most of the time, these conversations are probably going to be prompted a little bit more by the therapist of just like, look at what we've done. So like a part of like the good reasons to stop with your therapist is you walk out of session and you're just like, I'm kind of a badass. And also you feel, you know, I don't think any of us arrive at like a permanent healing place. So I think that's like a weird thing to think about, to be like, did you complete everything? But I think you're going from a place of some level of dysfunction or pain or hurt was happening, some way that you were being in the world that just wasn't working. So if that's your relationship, marriage, if that's your anxiety, if that's like, I have tools that I know how if my depression hits, like I feel super confident that I can move through that.
Okay. I feel like there are also some middle of the road scenarios that are like, my therapist is fine. I don't know. I don't know if I'm really getting anything out of it. It's hard to find another therapist. They haven't done anything harmful. You don't dislike them, but there's really no chemistry there, or it's just awkward. Maybe there's also a case where, okay, the thing I came to this therapist for, I'm doing better with. But now I really need to talk to someone about my relationship with my mom. And this therapist doesn't specialize in that. And I'd like to find someone who does. Those feel like some other possibilities, yeah?
I mean, the hard thing is like the therapist really should be the one to hold all of these like possibilities and scenarios and sort of knowing when to refer you or not. But we have that fact that like they are running a business, right? So there's like that piece of it. You might be a likable person, right? Like even if it's out of the scope of my work, like you show up every week, you pay, right? You're enjoyable to be around. You don't really stress me out. So I think there's like a lot of areas where therapists might just sort of let people go on that because it's like totally fine. And then I think we can sort of go down the gradient of like, you know, you're going to pass through like, I mean, the big one is that I think a lot of people dismiss is like if your therapist is sort of like folding in a little homophobia, folding in a little maybe like racism or colorism. I feel like that gets folded in quite a bit, where like it might show up in therapy where you talk about, I'm really struggling with my boss. And your therapist like keeps pressing for you to just like speak up and like ask for that raise and And then you bring up, you're like, my boss has fired every other Black woman who's asked for a raise. And your therapist is like, I don't think that really matters too much. What you need to do, and it's just like, and like does this. But then they're giving you these like helpful tools and tricks. The person is helping me enough. I feel a little bit better. I have someone I can talk to. They're giving me some tangible skills. But then like, well, now I can't talk to them about how I want to open up my marriage. I can't talk to them about my sexuality because they've like clearly expressed some views of like, well, you're married to a man, so like that's not a thing we need to explore. And so like I think it's like that wishy-washy area of like, how can I possibly give up this place where I feel some level of belonging, not knowing if I'm going to find something deeper or better. So I feel like that's sort of like the funky area that people really get stuck in. And then the big scary ones. So obviously, if your therapist hits on you, if your therapist physically harms you, assaults you, sexually harasses you, your therapist should always keep full confidentiality, and they always should have your best interest in mind. So if you walk out of a session and you do not feel like that person has your best interest in mind, that should be an immediate red flag, no matter sort of what happened in session.
So if you're deciding whether you want to call it or try to give it another chance and work through it,
Mm-hmm.
what might that conversation sound like with your therapist? You're feeling iffy, you're feeling confused, you're not sure you're really growing, you're not sure what the next steps are.
I would just start by saying, after session, I'm not feeling great. You know what I mean? Like, I don't need to feel like super happy and like skipping down the street after session, but like I'm leaving here feeling confused. And I think I've really lost track of like, I came in for this, or I came in because I was in a lot of pain, or after the breakup. We've talked about those things, and now we like continue to have sessions, and I don't really know what we're doing. Even if you end up ending with that therapist, because whatever response they give you isn't great, right? Or like doesn't work for you, doesn't do anything. How cool is it to think about the fact that you had this gut feeling and then you took this opportunity to vocalize it? You know, it's not with your mom or a friend where you're like, I don't want to risk that relationship. Like, this is the relationship you get to test this out and risk. And there might be a certain percentage of people who test that out. And then like the therapist is like, yeah, I haven't figured out how to access you either. Right. And then they can just like have a super real conversation and like set some fresh goals, or just talk about like if there's anything that's been missed.
Okay, when do you decide to call it quits? Like, is there a certain number of sessions that you should give someone if you just started with them before before you throw in the towel?
So in couples therapy, I'm often like 3 to 6 sessions, because it's like super messy, and like most people are going to couples therapy like pretty like worked up, right? There's like some level of like something going on. In individual therapy, I would say like, if nothing terrible happened, if you have the resources to give it like 3 sessions, I think that's great. But also in the bottom part of like, what's the yucky stuff of like why we don't want to sit with this person again, like you don't need to give it a couple sessions if like you walk out of there and you're like, I feel super violated, this feels terrible. If you're able to ask yourself some questions of just like, what does this feel like in my body at the end of the session? What am I taking away from this session? What really stands out for me? And if you're kind of in that like funky place, like why don't just try like jotting down like the same questions after each session to see if there's any like level of movement that happened. Most of us, I mean, I feel like especially like female identifying humans are super conditioned to be people pleasers, and really conditioned like we can handle a massive amount of discomfort. This is not the place for that. Like discomfort in your healing, in them asking you a particular question of like, are we ready to do this trauma work? Are you ready to talk about, you know, your responsibility in that like, sure, right? But like if you're sitting in every therapy session and you're like crawling out of your skin, just trust like nothing bad's happened, but like energetically, like there might just like be something that just like isn't working for you with that person.
Let's get into the nuts and bolts of this, right? The how do you go about ending it? Is there a right way? Is it you have to schedule a session, you have to schedule a phone call, you send an email, you ghost them? Like there are many options on the menu. What feels like the right thing? Is there a standard here?
I think the standard should be like what feels best for you as like your first guiding like value in that standard of like, what do you need? Like ask yourself that first and then pick from these options, right? So like, I think ghosting is perfectly acceptable in the fact that like, you don't tell your barista you're not coming back tomorrow when you switch a coffee shop. Like there is a service level that's happening here. So if they've done something that you're just like, I tried, I can't do it. Like, I mean, I feel like therapists are going to listen to this and just completely cringe, because it's like the nightmare of the therapist to be like, I don't know what I did wrong, but like you lose people. It's okay. most of us probably just want to ghost the thing and like not deal with it. And so if you know, like maybe even if you haven't done that work with the therapist, but some of your work is being less avoidant and being more just like honest and open, you could also think of it as like, here's my free therapy session. I'm going to craft this email. If you have a secure way that you access your therapist, like through Simple Practice or something like that, I would do like that level of messaging or the email. I don't think you need to make a phone call. You can, like, if you want to, if that feels better for you. Again, like asking yourself, like, what do you need? Do you need to process this ending? And you could also just be like, if you don't want to do any explanation, you could just be like, hey, I just want to let you know that I'm going to find other resources. Can you give me referrals and resources? And we can talk about that. And that's a really sort of like, it's a respectful thing to do if you don't want to dive into like the why.
And is that even if you've been seeing someone for like 5 years, you can just email them?
I mean, you can do whatever you want. If it's a hard thing and you want to have that conversation, really center yourself. Why do you want to have that conversation? What do you need out of that conversation? Why is that conversation important to you? This is a time to be selfish, right? Like, this does not mean you're a narcissist or something like that. Like, you get to center your own needs in this. That's really, really important. The therapist is highly trained to handle these conversations. If it goes poorly, that's on them to figure out what other training they need, or you could tell them. But like, you could just center your needs here. Like, how do you want to transition from this type of support to finding more, to just transitioning out, into the world in other ways?
Yeah. So if it's not a lovely reason that you're leaving, if it's my therapist said or did something really harmful, you don't owe them an explanation. You don't have to have that conversation with them unless you really want to.
Like, the reasons we really wouldn't want to contact them is if you're reporting them to the board.
What board?
All therapists should be licensed. So your licensing board. So yeah, if we get into like the scary reasons why you'd end, if this is someone that you're just like, oh, no, like, should I have called the police? Like, if we're in that scary territory, you sending that email could actually be a little bit dangerous for you. There's a level of accountability that's so much bigger than the conversation you're going to have with them.
Okay, time for some role play. I'm going to play the therapist, and Mariah will play my client. In scenario 1, Mariah enjoyed our time together, but she feels like she's accomplished everything she set out to do. It's like we climbed a mountain together, and now it's time for her to celebrate and move on. Hey, Mariah.
Hey.
What's going on today?
Feeling a little anxious.
Oh, okay. What's going on?
I love working with you, and I came in to like work through all my like mom crap, and like I've just like never felt so supported as I do like talking to you. But like I think I'm in a spot where like things are really good. Like I have this new job and I kind of feel like I'm flourishing, but I'm not like in transition anymore. And like I was just wondering what you thought about either like decreasing sessions or maybe like ending, like, and like the biggest thank you. Like it's so weird to like care about like what we've done so much, but also to know like I don't think I like need to show up every week for it anymore.
Yeah, thank you so much for saying that. And I see so much progress with you too. I'm really proud of you, proud for you. I think whether we decrease sessions or end is up to you. If we were to decrease sessions, like what would you want to keep working on or working towards?
I mean, I think that's like why I'm bringing it up, because I actually like coming in today, like sometimes I normally have like all this stuff that I want to work on, and like for the last couple sessions, like I just like haven't felt like there's like been a big thing, but it feels like super terrifying.
My door is open, so if there comes a time again, like in whatever, 6 months, a year, whenever that you want to come back or even just talk for a session or two, we can do that.
That's okay.
Yeah. I really focus on family stuff, so talking about everything with your mom and attachment has made a lot of sense. But if there's any sort of issue that you're thinking about in your life where you would benefit from a therapist and I'm not the right fit, I'm happy to refer you to somebody.
I'll think about that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
And then we also like still have the rest of our session today.
That is like, I feel like that would be the platonic ideal of what would happen, right? If you went in, what your therapist would say and offer.
I think the nice thing is that when you're doing this really well with a therapist, you have a great relationship. This is the modeling that's so crucial for therapists. Like this person that you care about just did something super scary. And if you can model that, like, it's okay. Sometimes the nice thing that you'll do is to be like, cut scene. I know that was super scary for you. I'm so proud of you. That was amazing. And then they'll be like, oh my goodness, this is so crazy. And I'm just like, that was so great. Like, do you want to process that? And you're going to do that with your body language, your tone of voice, eye contact, and the ability to like carry the moment, right? Because they're just like doing all of these things.
Okay, scenario 2 is going to be trickier. As Mariah's therapist, I've been really dismissive of her and her interest in exploring her bisexuality. And specifically, I've said it shouldn't matter because she's married to a man. So she's ready to bring that up because she doesn't know if we're the right fit anymore. And again, this is a role play. These are absolutely not my personal beliefs. Hey, Mariah, how are you?
At least you look a little off.
What's going on?
Do you remember a couple, 6 sessions ago, maybe, like right before that work holiday party? I was like hanging out with like people, and like I kind of brought up that like I just like felt like super turned on by like this person, and like their mind was really awesome, and it was just like in this way that like I think I've just like been craving. And I know like we talked about like before I was married, like obviously like, I mean, you remember me talking about like being with Janice. And this was like 6 sessions ago, like I'm still thinking about it. And like I just felt like when I brought it up, you were just like, you were like really worried about my husband. But like I need to like have my space to like process like what happened at that party.
Yeah, I think I just feel like you're married. So like you made that choice, and I don't know how it's really that relevant. Like what you're feeling for this other person, like you made a commitment.
I mean, I haven't done anything with this person, and like I don't even know if this would be a person I like want to explore anything with. But like my husband's like very cool. I mean, they might be even turned on. I don't know. That's like a different conversation to have. But like they're super cool with me being like, I, for all I know, have one life. And like I have like, just as if I was like interested in a new job, or like, you know, I've explored like some of my gender stuff and like how I want to be and how I want to present in the world. And like I just like feel like it's 6 weeks. I'm like still thinking about not that person who was like super cool, but I'm like thinking about like how I felt in that moment. And like I'm super craving to like just like explore that. And like I think like I should be exploring that in therapy.
I guess I would just ask you to consider, Mariah, like why you have such a problem with commitment. You know, you're interested in so many different people. Like maybe you're just not happy with yourself.
I mean, because I'm bisexual means I'm not happy with myself. Have you ever like explored sexuality with people before?
Um, yeah, sure, for sure. I have clients of all different sexualities.
Like, do you have any training on it? Because I'm feeling like a really like, I'm a 13-year-old right now. Like, I need someone to like hold my hand in this and like be the stronger, smarter person. And like, I can't be the smart person in this because like, I don't even know what's okay or what's not okay. But like, I know like I taste some oxygen over there, and like, I need someone to like be okay with me like having oxygen.
Yeah, I wonder if there might be a therapist who's a better fit for that, who can talk to you more about that kind of thing.
But like, this feels really crappy to me.
Yeah, I could see that. Um, well, I'm sorry you feel that way.
Cringe.
That was my best impression of a bad therapist. I did something intentionally there that I felt was pretty manipulative. Instead of taking the feedback you were giving me, I was like, well, maybe though, don't you think that maybe you should consider that this is really a problem with you? You know? And there are really elegant ways to do that that can go unnoticed when you're in it.
Well, and I think the hard thing here is that like I modeled someone who is like, I have the stamina and the capacity to do this. a lot of times people don't. And like, we have to sort of respect that. Like, the first pass could have been enough, but I'm sort of modeling of like, but what would that language be? And how do we sort of keep going and be like, no, like, I know myself, and like, I know that I'm not doing what you're saying that I'm doing. Sure, if I'm in a good place, I can be like, well, this is some bull, whatever. But if I'm not in a good place, where am I about to end up? And then I think the hard thing is, like, some people are, though, getting exactly what they need to be like, no, you're just being avoidant. I asked you a really hard question last week, and like, you don't want to deal with it. And like, the therapist might say that, and that might be like, you're right. Right.
Yeah.
Not in this case scenario. So I think there is sort of like, if you are listening to this, to also ask yourself, I'm like, do you have a great therapist that like has your phone number? You know what I mean? Metaphorically.
Yeah.
I mean, they do have your number, but like, and like, they just like got to you too quick, but like, they know exactly what's going on. And
Yeah.
so you do want to sort of play that out a little bit.
So if you were going to pick a word that folks should embody as they approach this conversation, as they try to break up with their therapist, what would it be?
I'm just like, do you like this?
Mhm.
And my word is brave. Like, I'm in
Okay.
kindergarten, right?
Power poses.
Yeah, like, it's brave because we as humans are wired like our mammalian brain. Like, we are just animals, right? Like, we are wired for connection and belonging. These conversations that we just modeled, at their core, is us purposely choosing to cut off connection. For me to choose to cut off a relationship with you, no matter what harm you've done, that is an insanely brave, sort of like mind-boggling thing for me to do. And you making that active choice might be like the best work you're ever going to do in your entire life.
Okay, time for a recap. If you're worried about your therapist being a good fit for you, ask yourself, what are we working on? Do I feel like we're making progress? Can I bring up painful or hard to discuss topics? Mariah recommends asking yourself these after several sessions to see if your answers change over time. If you're starting to see a new therapist and you're not sure if you want to keep working with them, Mariah suggests meeting around 3 times for individual therapy before you make the call on whether you want to continue. If you do feel like it's time to end your relationship with your therapist, go with what works for you. If ghosting feels best, that's okay. An email works too. Ask yourself what you need to process this ending, and remember that you don't owe them an explanation.